Thanks, Siva. Okay, so for the next 1 hour, we're going to talk about something very different, and we're going to talk about creepy crawlies. So how many of you are scared of insects or spiders? Okay. So I'm glad, you should be glad that it's not a zoology class where you're holding insects or spiders. So we're just going to talk about it, and I hope by the end of this session, you'll be at least fascinated by it. If not, that disgust can be turned into some kind of wonder or fascination. So what I'm going to do for this talk is to take some examples from mainly insect societies, and try and see how the lives that they lead. So how insects are face similar challenges to us, and also what are some of the patterns or shapes, or some how does math come into in the world of insects? Can we even think about physics and maths in biology or in while studying insects? By the way, so I work on insects and spiders, so that's why I've chosen to talk about this. So can anybody tell me what are some basic kind of things which we share, some problems or challenges or everyday, day-to-day kind of things we share with insects? I'll give you one example to start with. So like we need shelter. So we talked about poverty and having not just food, but we need different kinds of things, right? We need shelter, or we need non-food stuffs, right? So just like humans need shelter, insects also need a place to stay. You may not have thought about this, but just like us, they also need to either build a house or find some place where they can go back to and stay there. Any other thoughts? Food? Yeah, so there is no right or wrong answer, so you can be free to tell me whatever you think, and we'll build upon that, right? So one is food. Like us, they also need to consume food. And in fact, I'm going to talk about all these things. So how do they build shelter? How do they, where do they find food? They might have enemies like us, or predators, right? So how many of you are studying biology? I just want to kind of get okay. Okay, so what I'm trying to illustrate is that the problems we face may not be unique to us. A lot of different animals and plants also might have similar challenges, and including tiny things like insects, right? So to give you an example, so finding food and shelter, finding a partner or finding a mate and able to reproduce, taking care of young, just like us. A lot of insects take care of their young and protect themselves from predators. In order to find food, they need to know where to go, right? And they have to remember where to go. These things you might not even have thought about, because who cares about insects? The insects which you have come across may be mosquitoes at night or cockroaches, right? So even cockroaches have to learn to go to a food source and go back to its house. So these are some of the challenges that even a tiny thing like an insect might face. So that means if you have to remember, they need to have a brain. So it might be a size of a pinhead, but still they have to have a brain. Insects also, say some ants teach other ants to find food. So there is also some kind of teaching. So it's not unique to humans. They recognize each other, some insects. So some social insects which live together, they have to recognize each other. And they, like us, there is also cheating in the insect world. If we have time, we'll get to it. Yeah. There are experiments which you can do and you can observe. So cheating may not be, so they may not know that, okay, today I'm going to cheat somebody. So it's not like that. Evolutionarily, it has evolved. So some, in a population, some are cheaters. Okay, so this is familiar to everybody, right? So this is how we find food. If we are hungry or if you need next day, okay, here in ICTS, food is provided, but still you have to go to a counter where to get food, or you have to go to a grocery store and buy vegetables and fruit, right? And so, but how do insects do it? There's no grocery store for insects, right? So imagine when I was coming to ICTS, you see this lot of nice fields or forested area, right? And there are a lot of insects trying to find food in something like this. There are, say for example, you can think of a bee or a butterfly which has to find food. So what is food for a bee? Nectar. So it has to go find flowers, and it has to remember which flower it has gone to if it has to come back, right? So how does a bee do it? So does anybody kind of guess and tell me? How does a bee say? So the problem is there is a beehive, and a bee has to go to some, say for example, it goes to a flower, and it has to come back, right? So that means that it has to remember where its house is and come back to that place. These are known as central place foragers. So bees, ants, wasps, so these are all social insects. They have a house which they come back to. Wherever they go, they come back to their own house. And they remember out of everything, like if it's, just imagine there might be a tiny ant nest somewhere on the ground. Even if you go outside, you'll see, there might be an ant nest. And these ants are going and collecting food, but they come back to the same area. So they have to remember how to find food and remember its own house, right? So how does a bee, find food and get back to its own house?
According to the direction of sun, or like they show a dancing behavior when they go back to their home. So there were some experiments when the scientists see that there they place like some stones in a circle. If they displace them, so bee lost their home. Like they were not able to go back to their home because they marked that circle to their home.
Yeah. So what he's telling is, of course, we are now, I'm going to tell you a story which I had not thought of, but since you are talking about this experiment, we can, so there was this experiment was done long time back. What the researcher did was, he wanted to find out how do bees find home, right? So say suppose this is its hive, beehive, okay? So don't imagine beehive in a tree, but imagine some nest on the ground. And he kept landmarks, so small pebbles around the nest. And the bee kind of circled bee or a wasp. In this case, it was a wasp. So you all know what is a wasp. It's okay if you don't know what is a wasp. It's similar to a bee, but they're all tiny, but they do different things. But wasps also collect nectar. Some wasps collect nectar. Some wasps live individually, and some are social. So you might be familiar with what is known as paper wasp. But anyway, so say this is the house of the wasp. So, and he had put some pebbles next to the around the house. So the wasp kind of learned this landmark as a cue to remember to come back to the house. So the same thing happens with bees also. And then what he did was remove the pebbles and kept it just next to it. Okay, so when the wasp came back, it didn't come back here, but it went here because it had learned the visual landmarks. So it's similar to us, right? Like how do we learn a new place, location of a new place? We kind of identify, okay, there is a tree here, or there is there is a bus stand here, or something is broken. So we learn landmarks, and that's how we remember a place to go back to. So in a similar way, bees also do that. So that's one answer. That's actually we'll see a small video of bee dance, which he was talking about. So this is just a slide to show how bees see the world. So we see it like this. So we see yellow flowers like this, but bees see the same flowers like this, because bees have they see in ultraviolet. They have UV sensitive receptors, so they can see not only in the visible range but also in the UV range. So the same flower looks like this to a bee. Now, what is the use of why can't these flowers look like this to a bee? In fact, flowers are telling bees that, so there is a contrast here, right? So this is where the nectar is. So for example, if it was all in the same color, if there was no contrast, then bee or a butterfly or any other pollinator had to kind of find its way to the center. Whereas here, since there is a contrast, it can easily locate where the nectar is. Did everybody, I'm now talking about how plants have evolved certain traits in order for pollinators to make life easy for them. Did everybody get this? So it is basically plants are kind of talking to these pollinators and saying that, look, I'm making it easy for you. This doesn't happen in one generation. I'm talking about evolutionarily, how things have evolved in such a way that these are known as nectar guidelines. So they are guiding the pollinators right here where the nectar belongs. Anyway, so this is just a deviation from our question about how do bees find home, or how do bees find food. So this is the problem, right? So let's imagine this is its hive, beehive, and this is the food. And how does bee find it? And once it finds it, it comes back to the hive and tells other bees where the food is. And imagine the researcher who found this. So he or she sat patiently looking at hundreds of hives over, I don't know how many years. And this person discovered that there is what is known as a bee dance. So once a bee has found a food source, it does what is known as a waggle dance. So it shakes its butt and does some kind of a waggle dance on the hive where every other bee is watching it. And from this, depending on the direction of the abdomen, the way it is shaking its abdomen and how long it does it, gives the where the direction in which the bees have to go to the food source, and also how far the food source is. Fascinating. Just by seeing how a bee dances, this is the information the other bee, honeybee workers are getting at. So they get direction and also distance of food source from this waggle dance. So I'll show you a small video to demonstrate this. You can just minimize it, and then from the folder you can show.
Honeybee workers are able to send complex messages to one another. In the wild, they sometimes nest out in the open, but mankind has persuaded them to live and store their honey in hives. The colony's hive.
Okay, so you can try for a bit. So what you'll see is actually a bee waggle dance. And have you all seen these BBC documentaries narrated by Attenborough, David Attenborough? He's one of the leading British naturalists. And of course, anything, yeah, there it is. Volume is...
It's messages to one another. In the wild, they sometimes nest out in the open, but mankind has persuaded them to live and store their honey in hives. The colony's heart is its queen. She is just a little bigger than her subjects and mother of them all. In spring, when food stocks are low, the workers get busy collecting nectar. They have a remarkable method of telling one another where to find the most productive flowers. It's called the waggle dance. This returning bee has just found a new source of nectar and is going to tell others in the hive about it. First, she gathers an audience. To do that, she climbs on her sisters' backs and vibrates her abdomen. Now that she's got their attention, she begins her dance, using a code of movements that tell her fellow workers where her discovery lies. The duration of her waggle indicates the distance to the nectar source. The longer the waggle, the further the flower. And the angle at which she dances across the comb tells them the direction to the flower in relation to the sun. Her instructions are remarkably accurate and can pinpoint the location of a nectar source over 6 kilometers away. Some of her fellow workers set off immediately to find it. In one short season, the colony's workers will visit up to 500 million flowers and will make around 90 kilograms of honey. That is sufficient to sustain the whole colony through the coming winter when there is no nectar to be had.
So you understood what waggle dance is, right? Okay, so this is the math part. Okay, so how does it know? How does it come back? How does the bee, even before it does waggle dance, how does the, say, suppose a bee has gone to find the nectar and then it comes back home, right? So say if this is the nest and here is the food, and if it goes in the straight line without doing any mistake, if it already knows where the nectar is, then let's not say, suppose this is the vector and while coming back, it's just the negative of that direction, right? But say, for example, it's finding food for the first time. So it, say you are locating ICTS for the first time, you don't know, and you ask different people and you get lost, somehow you make it here, right? Similarly, the bee might take a very circuitous long route to find a food source. So you add up all the, individual, so from here to here, you add up all the vectors, and then it comes back in a straight line. It doesn't follow this route, but it just comes back in the same straight line. So because it kind of just adds up, it's happening in the brain, so this is how it calculates. So it sums up all these, small, short distances, and then it just reverses the direction in which it's coming back. So it's, do you know what this is like? I don't know whether you are familiar with path integration. I don't know whether they do something like. So lot of insects which come back to their own, some kind of a house, does what is known as path integration, which means that they do some kind of a, little bit of math in their little brain, but they figure out the smallest route possible while coming back to their house. So, okay, little bit more about bees. So this is how a beehive looks like, right? So all of you have seen this, and what is the shape of the beehive? Hexagonal, right? So the question is, why hexagon? Why doesn't it build, circular cells or square cells, or why hexagon? Sorry, who's, yeah.
Like mathematically, that is the most
most efficient
way of, yeah.
So circles, so this has got to do with packing. Say if you arrange circles together, it's not the most efficient way of pack things together, right? Because there are all these empty, these spaces. So that's not very efficient. But if you take squares, this works well. Or triangles, squares and triangles also work well in terms of packing, right? But so why hexagon? Because it's, when compared to these two, hexagon still gives the most area to store honey. So you need to think about, you need to have a, some amount of biological basis to answer this. Squares and triangle also does the same job of, packing something very most efficiently, but hexagon gives, more space, and so that one can store more honey. After all, why are beehives? Why do honeybees build hives? It is to provide honey for its own larva, honey and pollen. Okay, larva is a young one of a bee. It's a baby bee. So it's not, bees are not making honey for us to consume. It's for their own young, and we kind of go and destroy it and get the honey. That's a different matter altogether. But so these hexagons are, we are all kind of used to thinking that yes, beehives are made up of these hexagonal cells, but they're not always perfect. So here is a nice, hexagon. So by the way these, this is made up of wax, right? So the beehive is made up of wax. So initially it starts off as a circle, and then all the corners are kind of pushed and then it becomes a hexagon. Since it's wax, the bees kind of can change the temperature in the hive, and it can mold the wax the way it wants. So that's how these hexagonal patterns come in. But this is a nice little hexagon cell, but here it doesn't look like a perfect hexagon, right? So even in beehives, it's not that it always makes perfect hexagonal cells. And this is how it makes a new cell is started. So it starts off like a flat surface. The wax is just laid out flat, and then the walls are built, and then initially it starts like this, and then the walls are raised, and then slowly the hexagonal cells come into picture. So, okay, this is just what I just said, construction of a new hexagonal cell. So it starts like this, and then, then the walls are built, and then, it's still, when the new cells are formed, it's still like this. It's not perfect hexagon, but then when the next layer comes in, then the hexagonal shape comes in. Okay, so I'm going to largely be talking about how do different kinds of insects build their homes. But of course, when we started, there was a huge list, right? How do they find mates? How do they, how do they cheat? All those things. I don't think I'll have time for all those things. If you guys are interested, we can talk later in the evening. So, okay, moving on to termites. All of you have seen termite mounds. Yeah. So one common myth: snakes don't build this. They might stay in abandoned termite hills, but termites build this termite mound. And it's not ants, it's termites who build it. Though sometimes it's called ant hill, but it's the termites who build this. Again, so it's made up of mud. So you might wonder what happens in rainy season, in monsoon. Right? Why doesn't it all get washed off? Any thoughts? There must be something else apart from mud. No? It may not be just mud. There are a few labs in India who actually right here in Bengaluru who are working on termites. This work which I'm presenting is by a graduate student in IISc in a Center for Ecological Sciences. So what they found that in fact termites build these nice termite mounds by by taking mud. So each termite goes and picks up a little piece of mud. It's like us building a house by laying brick by brick. Every brick is laid down and one more brick is laid on top of it. Just like that, each termite, so there are different caste system in termites and bees and ants. So there are worker and soldier termites, and of course, okay, let's look at a little bit of biology of termites. So here is this white big blob is the queen. Queen is an egg-laying factory. That's all she does. And somewhere here is a small male. And then there are these worker and soldiers. So they have distinct functions. Soldiers defend termite colony, and workers do all the other housekeeping stuff. So anyway, so both worker and soldiers take part in building a termite mound. So they take a little bit of mud. It has to be of the right amount of, there has to be right amount of moisture in it. So they don't like mud which is too dry or too wet. It has to be some amount of right optimal condition. So they mix their saliva and make it into a little tiny particle. It's known as bolus. And Okay, I'll come back to this. And then they build part by part, and they can actually, even if some, say for example, there is in rain, some portion gets disturbed, within half an hour or an hour or so, it can kind of patch up and get back into function. So what these researchers did in IISc was provide, they took some termites, they brought it into the lab, and they provided them with different kinds of material. They wanted to see whether termites can anyway build, start building with whatever they provide. So they gave them, tissue paper, they gave them copper filings, copper powder, they gave agar. Agar is like a jelly-like substance, and soil. Okay, so again there is a video. So this is just to show that, again, they gave several other kind of material, but here you can see that in the video you can see that they kind of struggle with these kinds of material. Yeah, so here what they have done is they have taken a container and they have kept termites in a container, and they have given different kinds of substrates to termite. And here you can see a termite happily digging and getting a little bit of soil and making it into a bolus. These guys are not really interested, they are trying to escape. Here, this looks kind of disturbed. So what is important is the texture of the material and the moisture level. So that's what they found, that there is some kind of an optimal property of these kinds of materials which they want. Okay, the ones which have tissue paper, they have managed to kind of bite a little bit of it, but again, it didn't go very well. So we'll show the next one. Yeah. So I'll just we'll just see another video about.
Honeybee workers are able to send complex.
Not this one. Not this one. This one. Yeah. So this video is, see these are all termites working, trying to patch up a piece of mold which was kind of disturbed. So this is after 11th minute. They have kind of already patched from here to here, and this is in just 16 minutes. They've completely closed up the broken area. Right. So this is studied, and there's what is known as collective behavior. This has been studied a lot in physics, biology, and also they also need a lot of mathematical tools to study this. So how the idea is, how do animals know how to behave collectively in a group? So behaving individually or doing some task individually is different from doing something in a group, right? So that means that there has to be some kind of a coordination. And here, with respect to termites, the queen is just laying eggs. She's sitting somewhere down deep in one of the galleries in the termite mound, and nobody is telling these worker termites what to do. Where is the crack? How many termite soldiers or workers have to go and patch up the cracks? Nobody is telling them. So how does these things work? Is a problem of collective behavior, which many people are studying these days. So it can be termites, it can be honeybees. Honeybees, when they're trying to go to a new hive, when they start a new hive or something, there is also a collective behavior. It can be, have you heard of locusts by any chance? So they're like grasshoppers. Have you heard that locusts came and wiped out a huge area of, paddy or something? So they are like grasshoppers, but they turn into these swarms, big swarms, where they go and like eat away your entire food crop. So there they also have this kind of a collective behavior. But so I'm just giving you examples of where, you know, biology is not purely, you know, it's not about dissection and, you know, taxonomy or anything, but these are the kind of things people are studying, which involves a little bit of physics, a little bit of maths, and just going out and seeing what is there in nature, and which you all can also do if you are interested in these kinds of things. Okay, this is, I'll probably end with this or the next concept. So this is about ants and, okay. So these are about ants, and say for example, you're left in a desert where you have to find your way back home. There are no landmarks, nothing, right? How do you come back home? So ants also face, these are desert ants, they also face the same problem. There are no landmarks, obvious landmarks, there are no trees or, you know, there are, you know, roads or anything. There are no obvious landmarks. Everything looks like this. So how do they find their way back home? And in fact, what researchers have done is done a clever experiment. So they thought that these ants can count. The ants can actually count how many steps they have taken, and they kind of count back the number of steps they have taken. So they can say they have taken 20 steps towards some food source. They know that they have taken 20 steps and they come back. They also use, so ants also use sun and star as landmarks to get some kind of direction. But this particular experiment was done to figure out whether the researchers had a hunch that they can kind of calculate the distance by you know, counting the steps they have taken. And so what they did was, okay, see, some people might think this is slightly cruel, so I'm kind of warning you guys, because when I say these kinds of things in class, people say that these kinds of things should not be done. But I think it was fairly, clever experiment to do. So what they did was, they took 3 groups of ants. One was just normal looking ants. Then they gave these ants slightly larger legs. So they gave them stilts. So do you all know what is a stilt? So it's just like a long stick on which you can stand, so you suddenly become big. Yeah. So these ants, so this is a regular ant, which has not been modified or manipulated, but this ant has got a extension of its leg. Okay. So they attached a tiny other some stick, thin stick where. And they behave normally, so they made sure that these ants were not behaving abnormally, right? And then there was another ant where they cut off its leg, all the 6 legs, so that not fully, but there were stumps of it remaining. So the legs were shortened. So why we can talk about the ethics of doing these kinds of experiments later, but what they achieved by this is. Okay, you tell me, the ants with longer legs, say for example, actually let's go to the next slide. Okay, so say let's assume this is the food source, okay? And this is ant with longer leg. These are stump-legged ants, these are normal ants. And they left these ants, so the ants went from their nest to the food source and they were coming back. They had to come back. So ants with longer legs, did they go farther from the nest or did they what would happen? What would you expect? Farther apart, right? If they knew how to count, if they counted their steps, so they took longer strides, right? So say, for example, did you all get this? Say, for example, from here, this end to that end, you had to go, and a taller individual would take fewer, will have longer strides, but will take fewer steps. So, but this was manipulated after it reached food source. So basically, it would count, say, if it had counted 20 steps to go to the food source, then in that 20 steps, suddenly if its leg is extended, it would reach beyond the nest. So, whereas ants with stumped legs would take more time or more number of steps to reach the food source. So, so the researchers thought that these ants had may have an internal pedometer. That means that some kind of a way to tell the number of steps they have, some kind of a way to count. They haven't figured out how they are doing this, but they know that this is one kind of a hunch that they are actually able to count. Okay, so by the way, so if there is a very nice video about this, so I've taken this picture from that video. So you can just Google "can ants count" and you'll see it's quite funny. The video is made quite nicely. So you can Google that and watch that. Okay. Okay, so moving from bees and ants to some pretty butterflies. Okay, so how do butterflies, so this is about how do butterflies get their color. And again, I'm not talking just about color in terms of pigment, but again, I'm connecting to some kind of pattern in these butterfly wings. So butterfly wings are made up of scales. So this is how the scales look under a microscope. So these are individual kind of cells. So by the way in which these cells are arranged, so if you go really close and look under electron microscope, so that's just a fancy very powerful microscope to see very tiny cells. I have not mentioned the scale here, but you can see that these scales, when you zoom in, correspond to some kind of a regular pattern, right? Repeated patterns. So actually the color comes of these kinds of repeated patterns. So what happens is when the sun falls on these patterns, so these are, sorry, I'm kind of not telling you the whole story, but so these are cells with some kind of a gap, air gap in them. And when sunlight hits these wings, there is some kind of a refraction going on. So think in terms of, you all have seen CDs, right? Which if you kind of move a CD, you can see the different patterns in it, different colors in it. So it's the same principle as that of a CD. So the color of these butterflies doesn't come from any pigments, at least the blues and the greens of a butterfly doesn't come from a pigment, but it's just pure physics and how light plays around with these structured patterns, structured arrays. And this is the same reason why peacock's feathers have those iridescent blue and green color. There's no pigment there, it's just, so it's very difficult to produce blue and greens in nature, not green, blue in nature. So it's how the cells or patterns are arranged and how light falls on it produces this. So structure produces color, basically. Yeah. But why do they need color? Why do butterflies need to be colorful? So Actually, again, I'm going back to UV signal. So this is how we see it under under visible light. So visible light is from 300 to 700, 400 to 700 nanometer, whereas this is how it's under UV. Okay, so butterflies have color probably because of two reasons that we know. One is mate choice. So the female butterfly prefers male to be colorful, and females, in fact, chooses the most bright or more colorful males. So males have evolved these kinds of coloration, or it might, startle, or it might scare away a predator. So suddenly, if there is a flash of color, say a butterfly is resting, so and suddenly it opens its wings and there is a flash of some color. So imagine this in a tropical like forest where everything is green and suddenly there is a flash of color. It might give a butterfly a few seconds to escape from a predator. Predator might get startled. Predator would be typically a bird or a which have very good vision. Okay. Okay. What I'll do is since people liked about cheating, and somebody talked about, somebody asked, can insects cheat? So I'll skip this. I'll talk about cheating and then I'll end there. Okay, I'll not talk about that. Huh? Oh, I didn't want to show them. Okay, well, okay, this was about how do we find partners or mate, what are the kind of things we choose, and what are the kind of things which are important for insects. We'll not talk about this for the time being. Well, okay, this I want to tell. We recognize each other, so there are, say, 40 of you, 45 of you. So you've been in this workshop for 1.5 weeks now. So you all know each other. So how do you recognize each other? By some kind of facial pattern, right? Or the way somebody behaves or the way somebody talks. Just like that, it turns out that these are paper wasps. So they have these kinds of, facial patterns, markings on their face, some yellow line here or some red marking there. And in fact, these wasps are able to recognize other wasps. They don't recognize humans, of course, but they are able to recognize other wasps by these patterns, and they can remember these things. So just like us, they also are good at remembering faces. And this makes sense biologically because they don't want to, say for example, if some other wasp comes into their house, they need to know, right? They need to know their own members of their house from others. So that's why it makes sense to have this kind of a trait. Okay. All right. So this is about mimicry. That means mimicry is resembling something. So mimicking something. That means, say, in a movie, a heroine wears something nice or some dress she wears. Next month, you see the same dress will be out in the market and everybody will be wearing something similar. So we are mimicking somebody famous or somebody well known, right? So in the insect world, there is mimicry. So they would mimic somebody either, okay, how do I say this? So they would mimic another insect or something else, which would be either dangerous or, or poisonous or something. So that other predators, other individuals who, say for example, okay, let me give you an example. So have you all heard of these, probably not, poison arrow frogs? There are some frogs which are poisonous. They're also bright. They're found in South America. So these are known as poison arrow frogs. A lot of them are brightly colored and they're also poisonous. So there might be other frogs which might look like these frogs. They themselves are not poisonous, but they just look like them. So whichever, say for example, if we go and see that same frog which is not poisonous, we might mistake it for a poisonous frog and we won't touch it, right? So there is an advantage to mimic something and fooling. So cheating is nothing but fooling somebody. So in that way, they are cheating predators to fool. They are fooling predators and then escaping predation. So here, these are all, what are these, by the way? Ants? Okay, I've already written it as ant mimicry in spiders. But okay, which of these are spiders? This is a spider. Could be a spider, no? This might be a spider. Okay, so only this is an ant. Rest three of them are spiders. So even this is a spider. So, this spider, these spiders are looking, only this is an ant. This looks exactly like a red ant. This is actually a spider. These are fairly common here. So if we go take a walk outside, if you get a chance, you might be able to see this right here. Or wherever you live, it will be on mango trees, these spiders. So why look like an ant? Because ants, I mean, you won't go and step into an ant hill, right? Ant nest, because we are scared of ants. Probably they'll bite us or, so like that. Other predators, so birds or lizards or other insects are also kind of scared of ants because they might bite them. So if you end up looking like an ant, then you can get protection from all these predators. They'll think that you are an ant and they won't mess with you. Right? So that's why these spiders have evolved to look. So this doesn't happen in over 1 or 2 days. They have evolved over many thousands of years of evolution has caused them to look like ants. And they not only look like ants, they also behave like ants. But they themselves are spiders. They are not ants, but they look and behave like ants. So these are various other. So there are bugs, beetles, cricket, flies. There are numerous other things which look like ants and behave like ants. So I'll stop here, and if there are questions later, we can talk.
For ants to find their paths, don't they also trail their scents behind so that they can find their path back? The ants, they trail their scent behind so they can find the path. What was the experiment done to prove that?
I didn't understand your question.
Okay. Ants, to find their path back to their home, they produce a scent so that they can find their path. What was the experiment to prove that?
Probably they would have erased, so even if you can say so the scent is known as pheromone, so they'll be producing some kind of a chemical trail as they go. So if you kind of erase that chemical trail, then and if they don't go in the same direction, if they get kind of confused and go somewhere else, that shows that there is some kind of a chemical trail. That's how you figure it.
In case of honeybees, you have used the term path integration, and usually insects use path integration for their navigation. So what is path integration and how do insects use path integration for their navigation?
Okay, to explain that, maybe we can talk after these things. It will take some time. Path integration is a complex thing, and I don't know, too much about path integration in order to explain it to you. But yes, a lot of insects use path integration for navigation, and so basically they will have some kind of a summation of different paths they have taken to go to a particular area, and then they always come back in the least, whatever takes the least amount of time to come back to the home, they use that. But how they do it, it has a lot of math and it's quite complicated to explain.
Ma'am, do butterflies change their color depending on what light they are exposed to? Because
No, they don't change their color, but depending on the movement of the wings, we might see their colors differently. So for example, the green butterflies which you saw, if the light falls in a different direction, it might look brown. So same in peacock feathers also, if you kind of change, if you hold the feather and kind of slightly change its angle, the same iridescent blue might have a different color. So it's not like it's actually changing the color, but it depends on how the light is falling on it, the direction.
what about in darkness?
Yeah, darkness, so there might be some UV component, so that in fact insects might use it, but butterflies are mostly diurnal, that means they are day active. They can't see that well in dark, right? So these things, what you have to keep in mind is how is it useful for a system, right? So it won't just evolve something which is not useful. In biology, animal or a plant or any other organism will only evolve things which might be beneficial for it, might be adaptive for it. It won't just randomly kind of evolve something which won't be of any use. Usually that's the case.